Well, the COP25 climate conference is underway in Madrid with a new report showing the past decade is almost certain to be the hottest on record. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned the point of no return is no longer over the horizon and is calling for urgent action. His calls are being echoed by young climate activist Greta Thunberg, who travelled across the Atlantic Ocean by a yacht to join the conference. Richie Merzian is the Climate and Energy Program Director at the Australia Institute, and he joins us from the conference in Madrid. Richie, good to have you with us. Greta Thunberg is capturing all the headlines, but is there any real sense of the urgency Guterres has spoken of at the conference?
It's building, but it's slow. Look, it'll be welcome when Greta joins people here in Madrid. She arrived in Lisbon yesterday after hitching a ride with that Australian couple. She was welcomed by the mayor, and I think she'll make her way to Madrid in time for a large protest scheduled for this Friday, which they're hoping will top the last one here in Madrid that reached 150,000 people in September. So building that groundswell, I think, is essential because it'll inject that sense of urgency that currently right now is sputtering along.
Indeed. Australia managed to win Fossil of the Day on day one of the conference. Is Australia in any way convincing anyone that the government is playing its part in the move towards the Paris Treaty?
The short answer is no. Australia has a poor climate track record. Emissions continue to trend upwards. Australia scrapped a working emissions trading scheme, and Australia pulled out of the UN's key climate finance body just last year. So Australia doesn't have that kind of track record to really bring forward these arguments that it's doing its fair share. And it'll have quite a difficult climate conference, I think, especially when Minister Taylor arrives. First time he'll be at a COP, and he's coming to play some rather defensive lines around why Australia should use controversial carbon credits to cut its climate action in order to meet its Paris target. So it'll have a tough time, I think.
If we're not fulfilling our obligations, are there other countries that are a shining light in this process?
There are some that are certainly taking to the stage. I mean, our neighbours in New Zealand have just implemented a climate change act. They're setting out a pathway to get to net zero emissions by 2050, and a number of other Pacific Island countries are really stepping up to do more. So there's certainly good examples, but some of the larger economies, the G20 economies, are the ones where most of the emissions reside, and that's where the leadership needs to be shown.
With the US so noticeably out of the deal, is China looking to take a leadership role?
China's been relatively low-key at this conference. The recent global carbon budget report came out just yesterday or today here, and it showed that China is responsible for about 28% of global emissions, so quite a large share, and so it should really be looking to do more. But often that happens with China when it's in collaboration with others. That worked really well when it collaborated with the US, and we got the Paris Agreement a few years ago. The question is who will help China come along that path, and Chancellor Angela Merkel seems to have stepped up and will be organising a conference with leaders of the EU and China next year in September to help do that, to help bring China forward and see if it can increase its ambition next year so that the largest polluter will start taking on a bit more of a share.
And so many people are talking about next year as being the deal where we will really see some activity, but of course time is running out.
Yeah, it is, and that urgency is, being spelled out quite clearly through more and more of these scientific reports that show how hot things are getting, that show how difficult some of these climate impacts are. We're feeling it back home. They're certainly feeling it here in Europe as well. So next year is the key year, and that momentum from September to now to next year needs to carry forward. I think a lot of that will be shown on the ground through more of these protests and student strikes, but more and more pressure will need to come on leaders if they're actually going to look at stepping up their 2030 targets.
Richie, appreciate you joining us. Thanks.
My pleasure.